2 million people. Gone. Not from war. Not from disease. Not from natural disaster. From rice. Or rather, from the absence of it. And the hands that took it. In 1944, northern Vietnam was one of the most fertile agricultural regions in all of Southeast Asia. The Red River Delta alone produced enough rice to feed millions. Farmers had worked those paddies for generations. The land was rich. The harvests were reliable. The people were not wealthy, but they were fed. That was about to change, because someone had decided their rice was more valuable than their lives. Japan had occupied Vietnam since 1940. Officially, they called it a partnership, a co-prosperity arrangement. Asia for Asians, they said. Liberation from Western colonialism, they said. But what they built was not liberation. It was extraction, and by 1944, the extraction had a quota. Japanese military planners needed rice, not for Vietnamese civilians. For Japanese soldiers fighting across the Pacific. For fuel. For industrial starch used in military production. They needed jute for sandbags. They needed cotton for uniforms. And so the order came down through the administrative machinery of occupation. Vietnamese farmers would stop growing rice for their families. They would grow industrial crops instead. Jute, cotton, castor oil plants. And whatever rice remained in storage, in granaries, in household jars, in village stockrooms, would be requisitioned. Taken, loaded onto military trucks, locked inside Japanese warehouses. The farmers had no say. The village headmen who protested were ignored. The written complaints filed through official channels were folded and placed in drawers. The system did not care. It had quotas to meet. Now here is where it gets darker. Because Japan did not act alone. The French colonial administration, which technically still governed Vietnam under Japanese supervision, knew. French officials received the reports. They read the death tallies coming in from provincial districts. And they did almost nothing. 2 occupying powers. 1 people starving. By late 1944, the warnings were everywhere. Village markets emptied. Granaries stood bare. Farmers who had planted jute instead of rice now had nothing to eat. Families began rationing. Then they stopped rationing because there was nothing left to ration. Wild roots, bark, grass seeds, insects. That was the diet of millions of Vietnamese people in the winter of 1944. And still, 30 kilometers away, Japanese military warehouses sat full. Soldiers walked past people dying in the street to reach those warehouses. They stepped around the bodies. They logged the inventory. They sent it north. By the spring of 1945, people were dying in the thousands, then in the tens of thousands. Entire villages emptied, not because people fled, but because they collapsed. Families left their homes to search for food and never came back. Roads into provincial towns became lined with the dead and the dying. Children were left in temples because their parents could no longer carry them. Women walked for days to reach a city hoping for aid. There was no aid. The death toll historians now estimate between 1 million and 2 million Vietnamese people, dead in a matter of months, on fertile land, surrounded by warehouses full of food. Let that sit with you for a moment. This was not a secret. Allied bombers, aware of the Japanese supply lines, had begun targeting transportation routes in northern Vietnam. Roads were damaged. Rail lines were hit. This made it harder to move food from the south to the north, which meant the warehouses in the south stayed full, and the people in the north kept dying. And no one in command, Japanese or French, gave the order to open those warehouses. Not one order, not one directive, not one signature on one document saying, "Release the rice to the civilian population." It never came. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, the famine was already ending, because the Viet Minh under Ho Chi Minh had begun organizing food redistribution in the countryside months earlier. They had moved through forests and villages with rice. Quietly, systematically. While 2 colonial administrations watched people die, the Viet Minh fed people. And in doing so, they built something Japan and France never anticipated. A revolution. The famine of 1944 to 1945 did not just kill 2 million Vietnamese people. It broke whatever remained of civilian trust in colonial rule. It handed the Viet Minh a moral authority that no military campaign could manufacture. It set the conditions for everything that followed. The First Indochina War, the American involvement, the decades of conflict that the world knows as the Vietnam War. All of it. All of it traces a direct line back to those empty granaries, those full warehouses, those 2 million dead. And here is what makes this story different from a tragedy. A tragedy is accidental. This was not accidental. Japanese military planners had modeled the food supply. They knew the requisitions would create a shortfall. There are documents. There are internal reports from Japanese administrative offices acknowledging the civilian food situation. They knew. They continued anyway. That is not negligence. That is a decision. And the decision killed 2 million people. There was no international tribunal for the Vietnamese famine. No Nuremberg equivalent convened to examine what happened in the Red River Delta. The officers who signed the requisition orders went home. Some resumed their careers. The warehouses were emptied and forgotten. The dead were buried in paddies and roadsides and temple courtyards with no markers, no records, no acknowledgement. For decades, this story barely appeared in Western history books. It was too inconvenient, too complicated, too damaging to the post-war narrative of Japanese rehabilitation and American alliance. And so it was quietly set aside. 2 million people. Set aside. If you are watching this right now and you feel something, that feeling is correct. Because this happened. It is documented. It is real. And it has been buried under 60 years of comfortable silence. The survivors are gone now. The grandchildren of the dead are middle-aged. The paddies are green again. But the record exists. And the only thing that keeps a buried record buried is silence. So do not be silent. Right now, before you scroll, share this video. Not because it is content. Because 2 million people deserve to be more than a footnote. Because the families who lost grandparents, parents, children to a man-made famine in 1944 deserve for the world to know the name of what was done to them. Share this. Send it to someone who thinks they know the full history of World War II. Send it to someone who has never heard the word Indochina. Send it to someone who needs to understand that atrocities do not require bombs to be atrocities. Sometimes all it takes is a locked warehouse, and a signature, and a decision that someone else's life is worth less than a quota. Drop a comment below. Tell me, did you know this happened? Had you ever heard of the Vietnamese famine of 1944? Because I want to know how buried this story really is. And if there is a chapter of suppressed history, a massacre, a cover-up, an atrocity that the textbook skipped, drop it in the comments right now. This channel exists to find those stories, to pull them out of the silence, to make sure the people who were erased get to be remembered. Drop the word rice in the comments if you watched until the end, because you just witnessed something most of the world has never been told. And that matters.